Welcome to the Navigating Solo podcast, the show dedicated to providing solo agers and allied professionals with valuable insights, practical advice, and supportive resources. I'm your host, Ailene Gerhardt, and today we have a very special guest who is a trailblazer in the field of solo aging. Sara Zeff Geber is the nation's foremost expert on solo aging. She is an author, professional speaker, and certified retirement coach. In 2018, Sara was named an influencer in aging by PBS's Next Avenue and is a regular contributor to Forbes.com in the areas of aging and retirement. She has also been featured and quoted in the Journal of Active Aging, the Certified Senior Advisor Journal, Next Avenue, Senior Living Foresight, McKnight's Living, Senior Housing Business, and many others. Sara's book, Essential Retirement Planning for Solo Agers, a retirement and aging roadmap for single and child free adults, was published in 2018 and was selected that year as a best book on aging well by the Wall Street Journal. Sara, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Ailene. I'm really happy to be here. It's exciting that you're doing this.
Yes, and you are our very first guest. And with that, we'll delve into a little bit of your personal journey. Can you share a little bit about the path you've taken to the deep dive in solo aging and what inspired you to focus on this particular aspect of aging?
Sure, be happy to. I guess it was about 10 years ago. I was some retirement coaching, which is what I had gotten into after a life of management consulting. And I was having a glass of wine at one of those cute little wine bars we have on the West Coast here with a friend of mine. And she and I usually got together several times a year just to catch up. And I hadn't seen her in almost an entire year. And I said, Sandy, what's going on? She said, well, I've been on an airplane flying back and forth to the East Coast to try and get my mother squared away. I lost my father 2 or 3 years ago, and my mom just hasn't been doing that well. So my brother and I decided we needed to move her out of her single family home into a safer environment. So we went with her and explored a lot of options, and she finally found one she liked, and we got her moved. But that wasn't the end of it. Then I had to get all her stuff moved, and then what she couldn't take with her we had to give away or sell, and then finally we had to sell her home. And it's been going on for over a year, and there's no end in sight yet, although thankfully mom's happy. So after listening to that for a while, I looked at her and I said, Sandy, you and I don't have kids. Who's going to do that for us? And that question, to which there was no answer between the two of us, that question has led to my path in exploring solo aging, talking about it, and essentially raising awareness about it. Because as I go on and answer more of Aileen's questions, I'll tell you just how prevalent it is. So that was the genesis.
So when you dove in, there were a number of phrases related to older adults who might fit in a particular slice of this demographic. And you coined the phrase solo ager. How did you come to that framing? And since you've done that, how do you think it has or hasn't changed over time?
Well, I'm delighted that at this time, solo aging seems to be the preferred expression for, and let me at this point define it because I think that's confusing for a lot of people. My definition of solo ager is anyone who does not have children, whether they're married or single, and anyone who does not see any family support coming down the road for them as they get older. It may mean that there are kids, but they live very far away, or they have kids that are estranged, or kids that simply failed to launch and really can't be depended upon.
Mhm.
So, even though my initial definition of a solo ager was very confined, it was anyone who didn't have children. Bam, you're a solo ager. I have been talked out of that many times by people that I work with, people that come to hear my talks, people that I coach. And they say, no, you can't exclude people who live alone and who don't really have or don't foresee any family support coming their way. So I've expanded my definition to include that. Now, back to Aileen's original question, what was out there when I first started
Right.
doing the research and looking at it, the only expression that was being used at the time was one that was actually developed by the medical community,
Mhm.
and it was elder orphan. And I so hated that expression that I had to find something else. It kind of racked my brain for a while, asked a bunch of friends, asked my husband, and I think my husband was the one that finally came up with the one that stuck, which is solo aging. And I hoped it would catch on, and I think it has. A lot of people use it now. So that's where it came from.
That's great. I always share in my talks, a progression of the phrases, and I start with unbefriended elder, which is the biased slide. I've weighted how the phrases show up and land on solo ager, but unbefriended elder is to me one of the most
The worst.
disengaging, non endearing phrases. So, and that piece that medically, that elder orphan phrase came about so a clinician could kind of flag her patients in order to help look out for them is an important note as well. I am very grateful to you for coining solo aging. I find that to be a much better fit as well. And so you referred to some of those demographic changes, right? The notion that people are not living in multi-generational spaces in the same way, or adult family members aren't able or aren't willing or aren't in proximity. Are there any other trends you feel that, quote unquote, trends that you feel are can be attributed to the rising group of solo agers, and what the implications are of an increase in folks who might self identify as a solo ager?
Well, I think the first thing that's important for everybody to understand, everybody, whether you are a solo ager or not, because I defy you to put six people in a room and find that nobody is or even knows a solo ager. Everybody knows a solo ager. There's probably one in your family. So, what the reason that happened is because with the baby boomers, the rate of childbirth really plummeted. Up until the baby boomers started having kids, the rate of childlessness or child freeness, depending on how you like to look at it, was about 10%.
Hmm.
And before the days of in vitro fertilization, you either had kids or you adopted. And that it was adoption has always been hard and it's frankly expensive. So not a lot of people did it. So 10% of people simply couldn't have kids. That's the infertility rate. Along come the baby boomers, and with them comes the pill, for one thing, a loosening of kind of the constraints around what marriage is supposed to be and what women are supposed to do in the world. There was a lot of pressure on Congress to pass the Equal Rights Amendment, and they did. And this all happened during the 70s, right at the time that the earliest baby boomers were really coming of age.
Hmm.
So the world changed during the decade of the 70s and some of the early 80s. Today and back then, the doors to jobs, the doors to education were just flying open for women. And a lot of women walked right through them and said, you know what? I don't think I'm cut out for motherhood this time around. I think I'm going to have a career. So that was certainly my path and the path of many of my friends, many of whom are solo agers. So that changed the world. Now, fast forward 50 years,
Hmm.
and we're all getting older.
Hmm.
And guess what? Some of us amazingly still don't have children. It just never happened.
Hmm.
So so that's why we have so many, and the percentages, and this was actually the Pew Research Group did a study in 2010, which was about the tail end of baby boomers' childbearing years, and they found that over 19% of women had not born children. Now, that doesn't mean that some of them didn't go on to adopt or marry into a kind of a blended family and acquire children in that way. And then the Census Bureau actually commissioned a study in 2021 and found that among older adults, there there is approximately a 17% child free rate and older adults. And these are the same older adults that were boomers or that are boomers and were coming of age back in the
Hmm.
70s and 80s. So there you have it. There are a lot more of us. And when you factor in something that I call the family diaspora, meaning that
Hmm.
people just move. Kids go off to college or they go pursue a job on the other side of the country, and often they don't come back. I have a wonderful example. A neighbor of mine has, she and her husband have one son, and he's 36 now. Well, about 10 years ago, he had the nerve to fall in love with and marry a Danish woman. Well, they have three kids. And where do you think they're raising them? In
United States.
Copenhagen, where her
Right.
parents. So, so are they solo agers? Well, they kind of are. I don't think that their son, who now has three young ones under 10, is going to come racing back if something happens to them. He'd probably want to, but I bet it
Hmm.
would take him a better part of a week to get his act together to actually get there.
Right.
So, we have all these kind of these factors that add complexity to the whole situation. But there's so many people like that are having Zoom meetings with their kids every Sunday night now because that's when they see them.
So, this conversation and this topic and the thought about planning and knowing how to navigate certainly applies to anyone as they're looking at it from a perspective of aging. And of course, all of us are aging from the time we arrive on the planet. Someone once asked me at a Q&A as part of a community education talk, why didn't anyone teach us this in college? And I responded with, think about your 20-year-old self. Would you have listened to that? But fast forward a number of years, and it's really the opportunity to learn from folks like you in terms of that planning process. And I know that you have expertise and think about financial planning often, and it certainly is a crucial aspect for everyone as they age, but certainly for solo agers. Are there particular unique considerations for solo agers that you can think of and would like to share, especially around retirement planning?
I think that everyone, solo ager or not, needs to either pay a visit to a financial planner or set up their own system if they want. There's lots of actual apps out there for figuring out based on how much money you have today and what your investments are worth and what you predict for them, which, of course, all of which a financial advisor will do for you. Kind of figure out if you're going to run out of money and how you need to live in order to ensure that you have enough resources to the end of your life. And most financial planners today are using something in the mid 90s. And, for some of their healthier patients, they're going into like 102, 103 to make sure you have money to last you that long. It's kind of most financial planners, I think, kind of leave it up to you to say, what's your best shot?
Mhm.
How long do you think you're going to
Right.
live? But I think most of them are pretty uncomfortable doing it anything short of 90.
Hmm.
So, do you have the money to last you? And if it's kind of on the edge, how do you need to live to make that money last? So those are all really important discussions to have, ideally to have while you're still working, so that you and the financial advisor can work together to figure out how long do you need to work? What kind of income do you need in
Hmm.
order to support your lifestyle? On the other side of that coin is what kind of lifestyle changes do you need to make your money last? So those are the financial planning aspects. And they're really not a heck of a lot different than what a person who has children needs to do, unless one of their kids was an entrepreneur and started a company that's now worth 30 million, and they
Right.
don't have to worry. So those people who have pretty much normal kids who are just putting food on the table themselves and raising their own kids or having their own career, you know, most people I don't think factor in living in their kid's basement
True.
in in their future. So it's not an awful lot different.
Or even an accessory dwelling unit, right? An ADU, that those
Right.
are newer. So the idea of engaging people to talk about these things with, whether it's a professional like a financial advisor or planner, brings me to the thought about solo agers and social connections and the value
Mhm.
of having a strong, robust support network, and recognizing again that's vital for anyone. But it really comes to mind how important it is for solo agers, especially in that choosing, that intentionality around it. So so when you think about that in talking about financial planning or other aspects of planning, what what ways do you see people's support networks playing a role? And also, people always, I'm often asked the how, right? Okay, I get it, the value of the support system, and I know you'll have great insight on that. But what are some initial steps I can take to start building or enhancing that as well? So it's sort of a two-part question.
Sure. Solo agers need to do all the things that people who are parents need to do. They need to make sure that they have a full estate plan. And I'd like to quash the notion that you have to have a lot of money to have an estate plan, because in my way of thinking, an estate plan is encompasses a care plan as well. So, yes, you need an estate plan. Everybody needs a will. You also need something called an advance directive, also known as a power of attorney for healthcare, which Ailene, of course, knows more about than I do, I'm sure. But solo agers certainly need to have that. And one of the things that I find among solo agers is they hesitate to do that because they don't know who to choose or who to name as their proxies. And when I say proxy, I mean someone who's going to speak for you if you cannot. You need somebody to do that for health care in case you end up in the hospital and for whatever reason, mental or physical, cannot answer questions, cannot speak on your own behalf. You
Mhm.
need to have designated somebody to do that for you. And by the same token, you need to designate someone to make financial decisions for you. Make sure your bills are paid. Make sure that things are not getting bogged down while you're out of commission. Because it, you may be out of commission for 2 days and you may be out of commission for 6 months. So we just don't know. Anyway, those are two critical elements of the estate plan that solo agers need to make as well. And I encourage solo agers to really look around them as well as they can, as early as they can, for who is in their life that might be the right person for that. Could be a niece or a nephew, could be a much younger cousin. So it might be a relative of some sort, but it might not be. At one point, now my plan has changed just like most people's. I update it every 10 years. And somewhere in the middle of the process, I had on one of the lines for my advance directive the son of a friend of mine, a woman I've known all my life, and her kids know me, and I know them, and they know who I am. They know my values. I trust that they would make the right decision. So I named her son as one of those people. It kind of, the sky's the limit in terms of who you name. One of the things I discourage, and a lot of solo agers want to do this, they want to form pacts, they want to form agreements with their friends. Guess how old their friends are? The same age they are. Well, if you make a bond like that, I could tell you a much longer story about one of those that went wrong, one
Mm,
friend of mine. Um, only one of you gets to benefit, right? Only the first one to go down.
right.
So it's not a great idea to do that.
Well, that
We
often
can,
happens with partners too, right? They name each
yes,
other as their proxies, and often not in the short term, you know, concern or medical issue, but in a longer situation.
absolutely.
Again, that's only one person who is able to carry that out. And so it sounds like age diversity in a support network is a really good thing if you can achieve it. Do you have any suggestions for? I know in your book, you have a great way to sort of map out, okay, I'm in the center. Who are my connections? Because I always say to people, and Yogi Berra probably said this first, right? You don't know where you're going until you know where you've been, or where you are. And you have really fantastic worksheets in your book. So we'll talk about that at the end, but as a fabulous resource. But but that age diversity, right? So that everyone isn't in your peer group. Are there some,
Mhm.
when you talk about looking around, are there particular aspects of that in terms of age diversity that just fly off the top of your head, or?
Well, I have a lot of people ask me, I understand the importance of age diversity, but where do I find these younger friends?
Right.
So, so it could be anywhere. It could be in your next door neighbor or two doors down, people you've gotten to know. Especially if you've lived somewhere a long time, you've probably seen some of your neighbors raise kids, and those kids know you.
Hmm.
It also might be someone through your book club. I know I've been two book clubs. I don't know where I find the time to read, but I guess I just don't
A
sleep
healthy thing to do.
anyway.
A good commitment to lifelong learning. It's
Yeah,
always a good part of a
yeah.
plan.
So one of my book clubs is people are all just right around the same age I am. My other book club has people whose age ranges from the late 40s to the early 80s. So, there's an opportunity there. You might meet people at the gym or wherever you work out. You might meet people in a hiking group. But take a look at what you do, people you meet in your everyday life. And that's the best source, really, of people you might tap. And yeah, so there's another whole strategy around how to do that.
It's always good
First you
to
have
get
to
little
cultivate
quick
those
tips
relationships.
embedded in other conversations, right? So we've looked at an aspect of planning in terms of that financial piece, which really, helps you forecast some other pieces, which often include housing, right? The notion of staying where I might be living now. Some people refer to that as aging in place, or seeking out a new community or adding to their community. So I know that you have done some work trying to shift the lens a little bit in terms of senior living and what professionals may be looking at, especially in consideration of the baby boomer generation and all of that. Are there innovations or arrangements that you can think of in relation to solo agers, which could be really beneficial? And if so, how could they be beneficial?
Well, I like to start off saying about aging in place, that I'm not a huge fan of it for solo agers,
Hmm.
especially if aging in place means you're going to stay in your 2 or 3 story home. Um, with a where you drive in and out of your
Hmm.
garage and never see another neighbor, and maybe you don't even know your
Right.
neighbors. And the when your opportunity to see people is when you go out to lunch with a friend, or this assumes you're retired. Obviously, if you're still working, you see people that way.
Hmm.
But it's there's all kinds of nuances to it. I've seen people age in place in remarkable, wonderful little communities that were just naturally developed. They've got all ages, people know everybody else on the block, they've got 1 story homes. It can work. But I don't think solo agers should count on that if they don't have a community that looks and functions like that.
Hmm.
There are more and more opportunities to move into a supportive community. More and more opportunities like that develop all the time. Now, if you do have a supportive community around you now, you might be able to stay there for quite a while,
Mhm.
especially if you have a village, if you're part of a village to village network,
Mhm.
um, and can belong to that, because that can help you get a lot of the things done that you ordinarily would struggle with. So, there are lots of things can help you move forward still in your own home, but eventually I like to encourage solo agers to think about moving to some kind of retirement community where they will have the kind of support and social connections sort of built into the process.
Are there newer models coming along as looking at things that apply to how we live now, maybe differently than what was created as a model 30 years ago, 40 years ago? Things like co housing, shared housing. You mentioned one of my favorite, you didn't mention it as an abbreviation, but one of my favorite housing abbreviations, NORC, a naturally
Yeah.
occurring retirement community. Are there things that are being shaped differently when you refer to retirement communities that have different amenities than one might think of from years past or generations past?
Yeah, I think what happens for a lot of baby boomers is when they hear the term retirement community, they go in one or two directions. They either think of the nasty nursing home that their great grandmother was in, that,
Mm.
the first one to say there are still some of those around. But we're not talking about a nursing home here, we're a retirement community. And the people that own and manage retirement communities, whether it's a fancy one that you pay a lot of money to buy into and then have to pay a monthly on top of that, there are those, to the ones where it's a modest amount every month. It varies depending on what part of the country you're in. And they get it that baby boomers don't want to play shuffleboard. They don't want to play bingo.
Right.
They want to be outdoors. They want to be doing things. They want to be going places. And many of these kind of standalone retirement communities open their doors to independent older adults who can still live on their own, but would really like to give up the increasingly onerous tasks of preparing meals every day,
Mhm.
doing the wash, maintaining the lawn. All of that you get to give up when you move into a retirement community.
Mhm.
I encourage people to at least look at what's in their area. Because a lot of people they don't want to move out of their area. They still want to keep their friends as much as possible, even though they'll make new ones.
Right.
So go take a look. Figure out what's in your neighborhood and at least familiarize yourself with it.
That's great advice. I think that people will be pleasantly surprised, especially if they come from one of those two paths of it's this and this is the only model I know. So we've sort of alluded to people who are actively thinking about these components of planning. We always hope it's proactive, right? That's the ideal, that people are proactively planning, but we're all human and we're not all, and it's very hard to proactively do everything as a human. It just is, even
Yeah.
with the best of intentions. So, in the hopes that we have younger adults listening and can benefit from this conversation, and they may not have really considered the topic of solo aging or self identified that way yet, what advice would you give for people wanting to plan ahead, that proactive planning? To be able to benefit from the lifelong learning and the clear financial plan and all of that. Is there particular advice you would offer?
I I think I'd start with just saying, think about it. Just let yourself think about it. Let yourself think about what you might like in your later years, because they're going to come. They come for
Right.
all of us unless we. And for those who do get older, we're the lucky ones, right? We
Exactly.
didn't get cancer or something that took us
Right.
out of the game early.
Exactly.
So I'm a planner. I think it's great to look into the future and see what kinds of options there might be out there. I cannot emphasize enough knowing what's around you. Even assisted living communities, one day you may fall, you may break a hip, and you may not be able to live by yourself for a couple weeks. Where do you want to go? Check out the rehab facilities around you, check out their reputation. Be able to say to whoever is going to be responsible for helping you move from a hospital somewhere else, be able to say, even to the hospital staff, I don't want to go to this community over there. I want to go to this community over here.
Mhm.
Please see if they have a bed for me. Now, if you're sitting there listening to this and you're 55 or 65 or even 75, it doesn't sound like a reality, but reality can change in a heartbeat.
Right.
So it's just important to know what's around you. You're not making any commitments to anything, just be educated about it.
I think that's great advice, especially for people who look at it and think about all the different aspects that we've talked about and, can feel overwhelmed. That's the general sense of, oh my goodness, this is so overwhelming and all I am is stuck. And so
Mhm.
the notion of doing some proactive research so that you're in control of decisions is to me, a great way to shift from that feeling stuck, because to me that's really empowering. So I think that's really particularly useful. We've certainly
Mhm.
covered a lot in the solo aging realm, and I know there's so much more that you and I could without a doubt cover together. I wanted to shift to just a quick couple of personal interest questions just to make things a little different. So, if there was a particular skill or talent that you instantly were able to gain, have you ever thought of what that might be and why it might be?
Well, I would instantly love to speak about five languages. And I think, in terms of a physical ability or a sport, I think I would love to have become good at tennis. I think I haven't even taken up pickleball yet. I keep meaning to.
It'll be around.
But
You'll have
yeah, I
time,
think
right?
those are my things.
And a piece of advice that you've received that has really stuck with you over the years? Is there something that stands out for you?
Oh gosh, so many pieces of advice, mostly from my father. I think the one that has served me the best throughout my life and throughout my various careers is to say yes. Unless there's a darn good reason to say no, say yes. And that has opened so many doors for me throughout my life that I like to pass that along to anybody who's interested.
That's fantastic. He sounds like a very wise individual with a esteemed career of his own, I know. So it really is a gift for you to be able to share insights and spend some time together. Is there anything else before we wrap up that you think would be useful to add, or particular resources? I'll definitely give the details of your website and book as we wrap up. But is there anything that sticks out for you that you'd also like to share as part of our conversation?
Gosh, we've covered so much territory, Ailene. I just like to always remind people that if they don't consider themselves a solo ager, I know they have a solo ager, or many of them, somewhere in their life, because there are so many of us out there.
Hmm.
So help Ailene and me raise awareness about it
Right.
throughout the country and maybe the world.
Help us bang the drum. We always can
That's right.
use advocacy partners. There's no question about that. Well, thank you, Sarah. It really has been an enlightening and insightful conversation, and one I've really enjoyed. And you are the perfect first guest for the launch of this podcast. For listeners who want to learn more about Sarah and her work, her website is lifeencore.com. And Sarah is also available to be connected with via LinkedIn. For people for whom that sort of went by quickly, I will make sure to type that out in the show notes on the website so you're able to directly link off of that. And also make sure, if you haven't already, or if you have, revisit Sarah's book. Essential Retirement Planning for Solo Agers. It is, as we were discussing before we started recording, really an evergreen resource, an outstanding resource with fabulous worksheets and excellent information and really great guidance. And you can certainly learn from a trailblazer in the field. So without a doubt, I highly recommend checking out her book as well. So, with that, I'm going to say thank you for tuning in to the Navigating Solo podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, rate, and review on your favorite podcast platform. And we've distributed to as many as we could find. And as always, if you have any questions or any topics you would like to see us cover, you can email podcast@navigatingsolo.com. So until next time, stay empowered and stay connected. I am Ailene Gerhardt, and this is the Navigating Solo podcast.